Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Jehan Ara. I'm the founder of the Nest.io. And today we're going to be talking about what is new as far as businesses are concerned. You know, the coronavirus is changing what normal means for businesses around the world. Tremendous innovation has occurred over the past few weeks. Things have changed, and new ground has been broken in the way businesses have begun communicating and operating. Although there are elements of normal I crave, such as sleep, lower anxiety levels, I'm not sure normal should be the right goal to aspire to. In fact, the new normal just might be better than the old normal. The other day, I heard a CEO say that his team had a task force which had been working on the digital strategy for the past 3 years. But once this crisis took hold, they had it launched in just 10 days. New, exciting innovation is all around us. We've been forced to look for better, faster, cheaper, and more relevant options. We should take a look at what happened in our organization the past few weeks to allow that to happen. How do we feel, and how do we foster and reward this innovation going forward? How many more new ideas, products, and dollars, rupees are out there if you stay at least mentally in this area of innovation? You know, the usual approaches in business, and I understand why that is. The usual approval process has been suspended now. You know, that used to be write up a proposal, submit it for review. That's been replaced by can that be live tomorrow? Many organizations have so far operated under a fear of failure, and that's why they take so long for approvals and all of that. But thinking through every possible scenario is an urgency killer. We don't want to be reckless, but we can't go back to business as usual. We have to keep the urgency that makes things happen. It will be critical if we are to survive during the next 12 to 18 months. I'm fortunate today to have with me three wonderful business leaders who will share their insights with us, who will tell us what they think the new normal will be. Welcome, Maheen Rahman, CEO of Alfalah GHP Investment Management, Romana Abdullah, CEO of Highpoint Ventures, and last but not least, Eqan Ali Khan, GM Corporate Strategy, Business Development and Innovation at ICI Pakistan Limited. So let's get started. And Maheen, if you could get started, the first question I have is, do you think it will be difficult for businesses to go back to business as usual post-corona? How much of your workforce is working remotely right now? Has it impacted the performance of the organization? Is there any consideration to keep part of your workforce remote post COVID-19? I know that's a lot of questions in one, but if you could start the conversation, then Romana and Ikan can join in.
Sure. I mean, I'll address the easy ones first and then get to the tougher answers. But so we are now 100% work from home. And what has surprised us was how quickly we were able to adapt to that 100% work from home. I think we had, days to prepare for something like this because it, became evident very quickly that eventually some sort of curfew, some sort of lockdown would be imposed. So we literally had always planned for disaster recoveries where you have different sites operating, but here this was a completely different setup where you had to have everyone on sitting at home. So we were able to manage that quite well, and I think for the last 4 weeks it has barely used the office. I think there have been people going in to pick up personal things, but beyond that, the office space is not being used much. So what we found is operationally things actually work very well. What we've also found is we needed a lot less paper than we did before. Our meetings in terms of just general team meetings or things have become supremely efficient because now on Zoom calls there is less of that small talk and less of being sidetracked, so you actually stick to agendas. So what we're finding is that a general efficiency has kind of crept into the whole business environment. I would say on the flip side, there is a disadvantage to this naturally, because I think this works very well in a steady state type organization or in a factory organization where things are controlled from head office, etc. But when you are, trying to run a growing business and you are trying to expand your outreach, then that brainstorming and that teamwork and that element of teams coming together and that spirit, that is something that can only be managed face to face. That's hard to kind of put together on a Zoom video call, etc. So there are elements that are missing in this, which is why I think that there are certainly things that businesses like ours will take away, COVID or no COVID. I think that the concept of work from home as being a negative context, but in the Pakistan environment, that has gone out of the window completely. And what we are seeing is that there's some teams that don't necessarily need to be in the office at all times. The concept of 9 to 6, I think, has completely also gone out of the window. I think the concept of forcing people to show up at a certain time and complete a set of tasks in the office and then leave, that thinking has gone out of the window. Also, the concept of having large teams, the concept of having everyone do segmented work. What you're finding is that is not really necessary. We run a company of about 120, 130 staff, but we learned that just by sharing the remote connectivity connections, we really needed to only bring online about 30 people to get everything done, in the same time frame. So I think there are a lot of learnings from this. I do think that post-COVID, it's not going to go back to absolute normal. There are elements that will stay the same. For example, yes, teams will have to meet to brainstorm and things like that will happen. But the sharing of workspace, the use of commercial real estate, the need for large offices, I'm not sure that will really stay anymore. It might still be for industrial organizations that are doing manufacturing or, factories, etc. But for service level organizations, even financial institutions, the value of large office spaces, the value of having huge branch networks, I think those will be questioned now going forward. So I think there's a lot of learnings from here, and I think that elements of now will very much be present in the future.
Thank you, Maheen. That's a great start. Romana, what about you? What's your take on how things are going to be, how things are now, and are we going to go back to the new normal?
So we're not going to go back to the way things were. Okay. In terms of my business, we made sure that we had VPN so everyone could access their work remotely. And it's worked fairly well. I would say that, we've had up to 60 to 70% efficiency that we would have otherwise, had if everyone was available in the office. With our line of business, you do need in-person contact. So, we're sampling products, we're actually looking at products, checking the garment quality, etc., photographing product, etc. By the way, I run a kids' wear company. So obviously some physical, interaction is required. But we found that a lot of the cerebral work, be it data entry, be it thinking of new designs and brainstorming, that we managed to do fairly well. Now, for things to change or to stay this way post-COVID, I think we'll need to, as businesses, ensure a few things. One is that we need to make sure all our staff has good internet connectivity. So a lot of my employees come from smaller towns, and because of the shutdown, they went back home. And they don't have access to great internet, which has obviously created some problems. The other one is, and I think this might be a Pakistani mentality, but when people are at home or they're not coming into work, they think they're on holiday. So you need really good controls and really effective bosses on top of them to make sure that the deliverables are being met. And that's just a cultural shift. With training, you can overcome that. So I think if we invest in the whole virtual space, a workspace going forward, I see no reason why this can't continue. I also see that a lot of travel will come down, and I don't know what's going to happen to like airlines, which make money off corporate travel, but I expect a lot of corporate travel will cease to exist. You'll go for your important meetings, but everything else can happen on Zoom or Teams or whatever other social media digital package you use. So no, the world does not go back, but you will still need like a sort of a balance between physical space versus virtual space.
Thank you very much, Romana. Eqan, can we hear from you? You're in a totally different business from Maheen and Romana. So how do you think things will change? And how has it been during the lockdown? How much of your team has been working within the ICI premises, and how many have been working remotely? And what has that experience been like?
Thank you, Jehan, and hi, everybody. ICI Pakistan Limited is a large organization. We have different businesses which range from things like soda ash and polyester to chemicals and pharma and infant nutrition. Now, in such a large business where there is an industrial aspect as well, even if you want to, not everybody can essentially move out of the premises because you have plants to run and you have sales teams who have to make sure and supply chain teams who have to ensure deliveries as well. What we have done since this COVID epidemic has broken up, we took a very concerted effort in terms of we were one of the earlier organizations to actually implement work from home, despite all these challenges that I just mentioned. So our workforce, as we've talked today, aside from essential staff, and when I say essential staff, I mean people who have to run the plant, for example, and many of our businesses fall under essential services as designated by government. So you need food to eat, you need medicine, and so on and so forth. So for those things, people who are needed to be at the plant or in operations, only those people are there at those facilities. And there also we try to manage, we have put in place very strong institutional measures in order to check whoever is coming in and going out so that there is no risk of spread of the virus. Only those people go to the organization, all others are working from home. That experience has been quite interesting, and I'll be very candid for so we are not a startup, we are a very old organization. So there is a way of thinking that is prevalent even if you're an MNC or you have that kind of a culture prevalent. So there was this thing that, working from home does not really work. People don't put in the effort and you need to sit together to have the meetings and so on and so forth. And I think a lot of that has been changing, over this period. And I'm talking people in senior management. Because, in terms of our population, we have a very high percentage of millennials as well. They were always pushing for a work from home kind of a culture, but there used to be resistance from senior management that nahi yaar, it doesn't work because they're not used to that kind of a thing. So I think that is fundamentally changed, and people can now see that, this kind of a thing can work because productivity levels have not gone down. People are working well. They're not coming to office, but we are connected, thanks to all this technology, whether it's Zoom or a Microsoft Teams or any other thing, you're connected. So things are working very, very smoothly. In terms of moving forward, first I will comment on my organization. Our thinking is that even when the government does lift up the restrictions as far as movement is concerned, we are not going to have all the staff going back and immediately starting working. We'll take a very phased approach towards it, so that those social distancing can be maintained. And something which might also happen as a result of this, that we might have a permanent work from home policy kind of thing. It's too early to say for an organization like us, but it's something that at least we are now open to discuss, which we were not earlier on, to be very honest. As far as the overall environment is concerned, how the new normal will emerge. Well, I agree with the other panelists that the new normal will be different from what we used to have pre breakout of this epidemic. However, having said that, I don't really think in a country like ours, because you have to break the country into different stratas. So when we're talking here, we're talking a certain part of population. There, the work from home culture, which will be more prevalent versus some of the other parts of the economy and companies where it will be less so as well. So yes, there will be a change. I agree that the office spaces in terms of the need, it's going to reduce, but maybe the impact might not be as big as some of the other Western countries, but we're moving in that direction gradually. Definitely, yes.
So any of you can take this question. What kind of businesses do you think will be impacted by COVID post this crisis, and what kind of businesses will not see so much of an impact? So Romana already mentioned airlines and travel. What else?
If I may, as I was speaking, if I may continue, so in my view, if there is one thing that this has taught us, it has taken us back to the basics. Things we used to take for granted, we no longer take for granted. We have to go and make sure that food is available, groceries are available at home. We need to make sure that ourselves, our families, people around us, they are healthy. Okay, we used to take all this for granted. So essentially, all those industries which are part of essential, we've already seen an upsurge in demand, and I expect that to continue moving forward. And I'm talking the next year, 2-year horizon. Okay, industries which are part of luxury will take time to come back from this. Things like travel, of course, there's going to be an impact. Tourism industry will take a hit. Okay. On the other hand, people who are part of the digital ecosystem providing services which can provide solutions to consumers in the new environment, they're going to see a boom. And we already see that happening. Whether it's the food delivery services like Food Panda, or the likes of Netflix, which can provide entertainment, we see a big upsurge in demand. And some of those companies, their valuations have gone through the roof as well. If we talk of food companies, those companies which deal with essentials, they've actually seen an uptick in demand rather than, hit taking place during this period. Same is the case for companies which are dealing with hygiene and other such things, whether it's hand sanitizers, whether it's disinfectants, surface cleaners. I was just reading a report, RB has had a huge surge in demand for Dettol and Lysol, and it's having a very big positive on their bottom line. And same is the case with some of these other companies. So these kind of companies will be seeing an upsurge, all the essentials. But the luxury ones are going to gradually come back as the economy comes back, because we have to keep in mind that there is the impact of the epidemic per se, but then there is a huge economic impact that is taking place as well. If you look at what World Bank and IMF are forecasting, the global economy since the Great Depression will have the largest contraction. And it's true both for the developing countries as well as the developed countries. Countries like Pakistan are also expected to have a negative growth happening this year. So as people are pressed in terms of the cash they have, the focus will remain on essential, and gradually it will take some time. As things start improving, the non-essentials will start picking up as well.
Maheen or Romana, would you like to add something to this? To what Eqan?
Let me take this. So I agree with Eqan. I think he very comprehensively described what industries will come back and which will continue to suffer. I share that view. Digital is obviously the channel shift that we're going to see. So everything that was basic we'll see it grow in a digital form. So be it health, be it education, be it communications. So I think that's going to obviously, and e-commerce obviously, right? So that's going to be the shift and the growth coming there. The demand for basics will remain, luxury will take longer. One point I want to raise, and this is not looking at industries, but of size of business, right? Because what we will probably see is massive destruction in the smaller businesses who do not have the cash capacity. So I suspect most of the smaller businesses, the SMEs, they have 1 or 2 months max of operating cash flow. The minute their sales slow down or die, that's it. They're kind of wiped out. So what we will see is the medium to larger companies surviving, maybe some of the larger SEs, but there will be so many companies in every industry, even the basic good industries, which because they don't have sustaining power, may just actually die. And I do think that is should be a huge source of concern for MEs get made, right? It's a cauldron from which the MEs and the corporates come out. And if small companies can't survive, then it's a huge impact on GDP and employment and our future.
Maheen, what do you think about the loans that are being now provided through the state bank? Is that going to help where Romana has mentioned that, SMEs especially are going to suffer and with a 2-month window, that's not going to help much. Your mic is muted.
I lift from the state bank point, and let's take a little bit of a step back. I agree with my panelists on certain points, but I actually disagree on some other points. So let's take a little bit of a step back and let's talk about the economy, because that's really what's going to drive business, right? So when you look at the economy, let's look at the good stuff first. First of all, oil prices everywhere have crashed. This is very good for us generally on the external account, very good for our inflation, very good for our interest rates. I think there's a question showing up on my screen regarding, how long will this recession last, from Bilal. I actually think we'll see a contraction in growth. I'm not sure we'll see a recession. And the reason for that is quite simple. One, on your external account, we're not seeing too much pressure. So that whole crisis that we went through over the last 2 years, where we saw the rupee go from 100 rupees to 150 rupees, I don't think we will see that situation again, because the low oil segment really helps us. It gives us almost $6-7 billion of cushion on the external account, and we've done our analysis on $30 oil, not $15 oil, which is where it's sitting today. So there's a lot of cushion in that. Exports will take a hit. There is no doubt on that. The numbers that will now come through in April, May, and June will really indicate, which way exports are going, because that's dependent on the rest of the world. But even when you factor in, say, a 30% reduction of imports over the year, that's still not that much of a hit to us when it comes to the low oil benefit that we get. So on the current account, or on the currency at least, which is a big concern for many businesses, especially small businesses here, the currency does not look like it's going to stretch beyond 165, 170 in the near term. And those points have already been touched in the last 2 months. We have seen a high of 167 already. So we've already hit that number. We're not seeing a move to 190 or 200 at this point in time. The second thing is, when we hit recession, so recession is dependent on two things. It's dependent on large-scale manufacturing going to absolute negative growth. It's also dependent on the entire services sector completely collapsing for the course of a year. Because agriculture, which is a big component of our GDP, is actually not affected. So agriculture is actually something we didn't talk about, but agriculture is the key mainstay of most of our GDP projections, and there we are not seeing that impact. Now, when we talk about manufacturing, yes, there are plants that have been closed over April. Will those plants be closed for the entire year? Will there be that much demand destruction in the economy over the course of an entire year and a half, to say that will continue to contract by 20% to push us into a recession? And similarly on the services side, now while Sindh is a lockdown, I assure you the rest of the country, and we're talking Punjab upwards, is fairly kind of moving back to normalcy in some shape or form or the other. Yes, they're being strict on certain things like restaurants and that kind of business, but broadly, small traders are open, and this kind of activity is going on. And what you have to be very, very certain of is that we are suppressing demand right now, deliberately suppressing it, but we have not yet gone into demand destruction mode. And demand destruction is far more dangerous to an economy than just simply demand suppression. And if the government had not taken reasonable steps to assure that demand destruction didn't happen, then we would be in a far more difficult situation. But the reality is that the government so far has taken a lot of steps. When we come back to the state bank point, a lot of relief has been given in the form of liquidity to both small businesses, large businesses, and I expect that relief to continue, just to avoid layoffs and to avoid salary cuts, etc. The loan books of banks have been given time to relook at their credit exposure, relook at how long it takes to end up in a default situation. So those things really did help. And on the other side, which was quite critical, was the social safety nets which the government brought in. So we look at the social safety side. You disperse tremendous amounts of money via the SARS program and the BIS program. You can argue that it was not an efficient mechanism of distribution, but you cannot argue that it did provide relief to a lot of low-income, households. So these things are all will kind of tide you over the immediate term, the immediate next 2-3 months that you're facing. But everything that happens from there on is far more important. COVID or no COVID, we have to go back into a kind of economic activity mode. We can't stay shut down like this forever. And in that regard, would businesses do well? And I think the ones that actually can adapt, they will have to adapt to changing demand. I'm not saying destroyed demand, I'm saying changing demand. So perhaps if you had a company that made chemicals for a particular exporter, that exporter is not getting orders, make chemicals for a local industry. I think you will find a lot of businesses will shift inwards. The focus of the economy will be more towards local requirements. And that's a good thing, because we import, our manufacturing sector imports 65% of its raw materials. Why can those not be manufactured by businesses here and hence save us on the import side? So there will be a lot of adapting that businesses now have to do. If you're talking about the retail segment, internationally, retail in terms of bricks and mortar was on the down cycle anyway. Huge chunk of business had shifted online. Now our challenge is that we haven't supported our IT industry, we haven't given them even the status of an industry before, and that's what we need to look at now. These are the shifts that we'll see over the next year. But whether or not we end up in a recession, I don't think we'll go into a -2% or -3% growth. And if we do, it would be very short-lived in my view, because I think our biggest strength is still our domestic economy, and it's still our domestic people. And the fact that we have a very young workforce is going to kind of ensure that even the impact that we've seen on the COVID side is really not hit us as bad as, say, the US or Europe, etc.
Thank you, Maheen. Now from each of you, I'd like to hear, starting with you, Eqan, how has the COVID situation, and if you're able to share, because I know there are certain things you probably can't talk about, how has it impacted your company's bottom line? And do you expect this to, once the lockdown's over, that things will improve?
So as far as impact on our company's operations are concerned, when you look at ICI, you have to look at not one company, but a host of businesses that we have. So I'll talk segment by segment. First of all, we have soda ash, which essentially is something which goes into very basic industries like detergents and soaps and glass and paper manufacturing. So
all that works. All that is needed. Probably it's taken a steep curve, and more soaps are being bought, right? And detergents. Are you still there, or have you gone, Eqan? I think his line is dropped. Romana, would you like to take on this before Eqan comes back?
Sure. So I'm part of the retail sector. We have 32 stores around the country. So badly hit the first 2.5 weeks of the lockdown. We're headquartered in Lahore. So the first 2.5 weeks of the lockdown, delivery was shut as well as the stores. So revenue literally went to zero. And then for the last couple of weeks, e-commerce has restarted. And, I'm relieved to say that it's come back incredibly strongly. So we're seeing huge growth on our e-commerce channel because our physical, bricks and mortar customers are now placing orders online. So that's a sense of relief. However, that number is still cannot compete with sort of the stores, the volume that the stores were providing. So obviously year over year, we're down tremendously. April, May, June, the last quarter of this fiscal year is typically where most of the retailers and brands would make profits because, Ramzan hai, Eid hai, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to be posting losses. So things are difficult. And the viewpoint, I'm part of the Chain Store Association, which represents about 200 retailers in the country. And the outlook there is that the next 12 months are incredibly hard. So we've all, when we're forecasting fall winter season collections, we've slashed them by like 50% or something. So really, like best case would be that if we can go back almost a year and a half in terms of revenue, that's considered best case by the industry. Worst case is like, we go back behind like 2-3 years. So
are they planning maybe to come out with garments which may not be as expensive, perhaps change their lines so that they can continue to sell?
So if I can speak about us, but I suspect what you say is absolutely true, right? People will be looking at getting away from luxury and more into basics. People will be looking at doing e-commerce aggressively because that is here to stay. I mean, once a customer gets a taste of the convenience of e-commerce, like, the desire to go to a store, really vanishes. And I do think that we will see a lot of store closings, maybe some brands closings, but definitely there will be certain malls which do not come back from this, or certain shopping strips that may not come back from this. Yes, so people are trying to exactly figure out what will a customer want and need, and trying to forecast it. All of it is just complicated by the fact that we don't know how long this lasts, right? Is this a V-shaped recovery? Is it a dumbbell? What is it? And so at least we are just trying to be adept on our feet. Plan for like the middle case scenario, and then be ready to ramp up or ramp down based on what we see out there. So we're literally looking at our cash flows and our forecasts every day and every week.
Very sensible. Eqan, we lost you.
So
now you're back.
I'm sorry, there's an issue with the connection.
Yeah.
So I was just talking about our businesses, and so soda ash is essentially part of essentials. Okay, part of it. So we have not shut down our plant. We've been given permission to operate, operating, although not at the full rate because some of the downstream industries have been impacted. Our polyester plant is being closed because downstream textile, although we do see some retail trade happening, but it's actually so far not really allowed by the government. So that plant is closed. The pharma plant being part of essential, that is operational, but because of the OPTs being closed, we've had a slowdown in demand happening as far as some of our products are concerned, and we're working on alternate channels to make sure that we are on track. The infant nutrition business has actually had an uptick in demand, so it's doing quite well. And the chemicals business, again, those chemicals which are part of essential, they've seen an uptick in demand. So for example, we are a supplier of hand sanitizers to many of the industrial customers in Pakistan, and that business is taking an upsurge. So overall, we are relatively less impacted as compared to some of the other corporates because many of our businesses are part of the essential chain which is needed in these times. And moving forward, the way we see, nobody knows obviously, how long this is going to last because they're very, very differing views. I was reading a forecast which was done by Oxford, and they were saying that the peak is going to come in Pakistan in July. Now there are other studies which say otherwise. Okay, so let's hope it comes. This situation is resolved. So the quicker it is resolved, the sooner we can get back on track. But if there is a continuation of this scenario for a longer period of time, then yes, the overall economy gets impacted and everybody gets impacted. I would also like to make one more comment here. The comment that Maheen made earlier on. So, many of the things that she said, I actually do agree with them also. So while we are looking at the negative side of things, and I do see that there are lots of challenges, despite the measures taken by the government, that the businesses will be facing and consumers will also be facing. Having said that, there are many positives that this situation has also thrown for a country like Pakistan. Because yes, we are a net importer, oil prices are down, and yes, it's going to improve our balance of trade scenario, and our rupees getting stable, interest rates coming down. So on a while short term there's going to be a negative, I think the medium to long term can actually bode quite well for us as a country if we play our cards correctly.
Maheen, so you brought about the question of the IT sector not being considered an industry and not being utilized the best in the best possible scenario. What do you think? I mean, there were a lot of, I know as an IT company and as being part of the association and working with startups, IT was seen to be a luxury. Yeah, maybe one day we will look at digitizing. Now, this is from the government down to most private sector companies. Although they were using minimally, they had a website and that was it. And IT to them meant email exchanges and stuff like that. So how do you see this changing? Do you think people's perception of the importance of IT, the importance of digital is going to change post COVID? Because right now, I think all of you in your communications with your teams are probably using a lot of tools that you didn't use before. Is that going to continue? How do you see this perspective changing?
Right. So I think IT is now every CEO, every boardroom, every industry that I can think of, IT is now the main topic of discussion. How ready are we? How ready is our competition? How ready are our clients? How ready are our own employees? So in my mind, there's no doubt that IT is now suddenly front and center for everyone. Like I said, we went from shuffling hundreds of papers a day to just zero overnight. My team had no idea what Zoom was until a month back, and now they're all proficient in it. So the way I viewed at, not just viewed at, but the requirement of a business for IT has just suddenly shot through the roof. So I lift on the 2 points that my panelists said, that they're seeing e-commerce sales come through. They're seeing all the essentials are relatively unimpacted. I think the key thing here is we have to understand, again, it comes down to demand from the consumer. That has not disappeared. It's just been suppressed. If someone can't come to a store, they can't buy anything. So what you have to see is, do you have a distribution issue or do you have a demand issue? And once you are able to focus on which one is more relevant, is it a distribution issue? Then you have to see, okay, what works in that? You may have an excellent IT platform, but is it working for the majority of your consumer in terms of payments? You have a great IT platform that connects into your logistics company, but is your logistics company able to manage the deliveries? So there's a lot of things down the chain that are going to come through on this. And as far as we're concerned on the financial services, so if there's any industry, I would say that's massively impacted by any kind of event, and this one is really a black swan for us, it is really the asset management, because in times of trouble, people don't save, they don't invest, they just hold on to their cash. So what we have seen is a flight to safety from a lot of our investors, where they are just trying to hold on to cash balances and then wait and see in terms of what happens next. In terms of the way I see the business changing in terms of financial services, I think there will be much less reliance on physically going to see a client in a bank branch, and then much more of that happening either virtually or telesales, or outsourcing that to a BPO type company, so that the entire distribution channel will kind of shift from face to face to something which is a bit more virtual. I think the key trick in all companies in Pakistan, the key trick will be getting the employees on board, because this is where you face one, resistance. You also face a general lack of understanding on how IT systems can provide that capability. And you also face a fear of job loss, because naturally, bringing in efficiency to the system will result in redundancy somewhere along the line. So we have to, again, we come back to what's the advantage? You have an average age of 22 in this country, which is, in my view, ideal for, a generation that is coming into its own earning capacity and saying, well, we want this online, or we want this through our phone, or we want this through that. And I think we're just going to move towards that shift a lot faster. So if we're not thinking about IT, then I think you may as well, pack up and go home right now.
Romana, do you want to add something? What about it? I mean, e-commerce definitely is something that the retail sector is now seriously doing. I mean, they're looking at it, they're trying to improve the experience online. I don't think, I mean, I'm not sure whether this will mean closing of stores, but you know, a lot of people will prefer the convenience of being able to buy from the comfort of their own homes. So is are you or the entire, you know, the association you were talking about, are they looking at improving the IT experience that they have right now?
So first, I'd like to just comment on the previous question or point. So maybe I'm not as bullish about IT readiness of this country as maybe Maheen might be. I definitely think that yes, the CEOs and the boards and the employees are thinking about basic IT advantages. So sure, they're thinking of communications and they're thinking of sales, say e-commerce, but the IT strategic mindset. So how do we completely digitize our supply chain and think through, use AI to make better decisions? Those kind of questions, I think our country, or maybe, I don't think our senior leadership, at least barring a few companies, is necessarily working on it. I think our IT industry understands it, but I don't know if they're going to get many more customers suddenly from the local industry in the next year or two who want to do more sophisticated IT work. Everyone will up their basic IT infrastructure and get the communication angle right or the sales angle right, but I do not, at least I don't see much more than that happening. On the e-commerce side, finally, I think e-commerce ko kehte hain na, yahan jaan mil gayi hai. Up till I think 6 months or a year ago, the e-commerce industry was like a paltry $1 billion, which is shameful, absolutely shameful for a country our size, right? I'm not even going to put comparisons to our neighbors or anyone else, but $1 billion for Pakistan is kind of honestly terrible. So now we're going to see a lot of growth on it. So I think now jo 100% year-over-year growth chal rahi thi, you're probably going to see multiples of that happening. It's here to stay. Everyone recognizes it, and now everyone is working very, very fast so that if they did not have an effective online sales channel, how do they double down on it? I think we will be seeing a lot of new companies, a lot of new startups, coming forth in the e-commerce space. I expect to see a lot of volume. It's the natural trajectory is that over the years, I don't think in the immediate term future, but as we've seen in the US, right, the death of physical infrastructure, we will see it here also, but I suspect that's probably a decade or two away. We need to get e-commerce to scale, right? So I think that's sort of like second in the UK, in Europe, I think e-commerce is about 50% of retail sales as a result of this now. Pakistan, it was barely like 1 or 2%, right? So we needed to get into the double digits before we start seeing changes on the physical infrastructure side, but it will happen.
I'm going to turn to the questions coming from participants. Hassan Zakaria wants to know, many businesses have been talking about supplanting physical offices with work from home, etc. But don't you guys think that they would also have psychological impact when people would be working from home instead of coming to a physical space where they can have different kinds of activities and interact with peers? Want to take that, Eqan?
I think that's a very good question in the current context. Whether it's Pakistan or other countries in the world, since the breakout of this epidemic. So while people are working more and more from home, I think this challenge keeps coming in because the divide between home space and workspace has essentially finished. And that does throw challenges. In terms of the timings, you are not following an essential office time. You are supposed to be available whenever you need it. In terms of balancing, with your family life and your work life, there are challenges there as well. So in Pakistan, also companies who are doing so initially people are very happy, but then like if I talk of my company, more and more people actually want to go back to office. So they're waiting, when would the offices be open and we we go back. And I think it's very, very important for organizations to think this through, because the general view, at least in a country like Pakistan, has traditionally been that, if somebody is working from home, they're not really putting in the right kind of effort, which is not true. The amount of effort being put in at times actually is more, and the amount of stress being taken is actually at times more as well. So companies need to make sure that their employees who are not attuned and not used to this kind of a working environment, so they need to have programs in place to educate and keep people motivated. As far as our company is concerned, there are lots of things that we are doing with our HR, so things like online trainings are happening. And when I talk of online trainings, they're not just functional trainings, they're even sessions related to, wellness and well-being and all those kinds of things to keep people engaged and motivated, because it is a real issue which people do face. So hopefully, as time goes by, people get more used to it, both the employers and the employees. There's going to be new normal that is going to be emerging. We will go back to work at the office as well, but the acceptance in terms of work from home, as well as the mental compatibility to adjust to this change, is going to be picking up as well.
Thank you. Maheen, so people say, okay, it's easy for people who have large houses, who have space. Working from home is something they look forward to, even if sometimes it means that families and children sort of get in the way as far as focusing on work or a workspace is required. But what about people who live in a one-room scenario, 6 or 7 people? They actually want to get out, right? So do you think as companies are looking at a semi work from home and office space work scenario, this is something they should also be thinking of if they're looking at increasing productivity?
Yeah, I mean, this is a good question because, just judging from the experience of our own teams, some of them have been very happy. And some of them are very unhappy simply because they find they need that, they don't want to be bound to their houses. And you have to understand also, most people are not able to go anywhere generally. So it's not just a question of going to work. There's no recreation. There's no activity beyond what's at home. So that's kind of also filtering into, the psychological issues. I think there will be a mix, and it will depend very much on the type of organization and the scale of the organization, perhaps. I was talking to a colleague who works for a telecom company here, and they, obviously employ thousands of people, but they are also now thinking that, what is the need for such massive office spaces? You can have rotation shifts whereby, certain people come in on certain days. Does everyone need to come in every day necessarily, or can they manage from home and then come in twice a week? And that way you kind of rotate your staff around. And this is something we're also thinking of, that in the future, efficiency is key. And one of the biggest overheads for any corporation is rental. And rental really eats into a big chunk, other than rental, salaries and electricity. Those are like your big components when it comes to any business cost base. So what this has kind of shown us is that we can reduce those while at the same time keeping staff in kind of a rotational format within a smaller space. So these things will take a bit of time, I would imagine, to come through, because it does require a lot of thought behind it. It's not something we can shift into overnight, but I would imagine that a year from now, the nature of office space and the nature of the way employees come into work will start looking quite different.
I'm hoping that we will now see more women in the workforce, because
absolutely.
It's acceptable to work from home, and a lot of women, because obviously they have house commitments. They may have realized. I hope women are seeing their spouses work or whatever, their families work, and say, oh, we can do this too. We should apply. I think it's going to be great for our country if we finally get all our talented women out of home, or at least in home, but working.
Right, and that has huge implications for telehealth, virtual health, for virtual learning. The one of the saddest facts in Pakistan is that we have a lot of female doctor graduates. So we have a lot of MBBS that come out. But, they get married and they don't actually practice. But you suddenly open up an entire virtual world for them where they can still practice without leaving their home. And these things matter. They matter for us on the health side, on the health infrastructure side. They matter because we are we are spending a lot of money in educating people who then don't use that skill set is a loss to our economy. The other interesting thing I think has come out of this work from home is that you don't necessarily need every employee to, even if you're a Pakistan-based business, you don't need every employee to be in Pakistan. An employee could be sitting practically anywhere and still function as appropriately as they would otherwise. So there's a lot of benefits. I think eventually, we'll find a balance. Right now, this is not the time to, really shift heavily into figuring out what that long-term balance will be, because everybody's in sort of firefighting mode. But let the dust settle. And I think that some of the, like I mentioned before, some of this work from home, and this is here to stay. So a lot of change is coming through.
Some of the, some of what you mentioned is already happening. So startups like Sehat Kahani, Relive Now, these people have been providing, for a long time, they've been providing remote mental health guidance as well as access to doctors. And suddenly the need for them has spiked and everybody's trying to contact them. People who weren't taking them seriously, a month or two ago, are now suddenly saying, hey, we need you. So I think you're right. Telehealth is something that people have been talking about for years, but in Pakistan, adoption was not taking place as quickly as we would have liked. And a lot of women who have become doctors were just sitting at home. So I think this is going to be great for them. How do you see, in the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of co-working spaces opening up across Pakistan. Do you see a role for them now suddenly? I mean, with social distancing, with people, with companies not needing as many people as they think they did, 6 weeks ago, thinking that they're going to shrink the size of their teams. Do you see a role for these co-working spaces? And how are they going to work? I mean, they're not supposed to be working close to each other. Are they going to change the design of these spaces? This is all something that businesses who are in that space need to think about. Any suggestions for them?
Okay, I mean, just on co-working space, so that's been around for a while. And it's actually one of the few sort of sectors, I don't call it a sector yet, but it's actually a business that is quite growing. It was growing before COVID as well. So I think it will have its benefits. It will also have its challenges. Not everyone can, by law work in a co-working space. I don't think financial institutions are capable of taking that on. There is, generally requirements for work to be conducted separately. I think for smaller businesses, it's always been on the cards. What I would, think about on that space is that co-working costs in terms of sharing that space, those need to come down quite a bit because it is still a prohibitively expensive business, which is why you see mostly foreign companies want to use it because they don't want to take the effort of setting up their own space. But if you want locals to get into it in a big way, then the costing on that has to come down dramatically because, it just does not compare to regular commercial real estate. So if they're going to be competitive, then they have to relook at their pricing models for sure.
Okay, one of the other things that we've seen, and Eqan and Romana, if you would like to answer this question, is that suddenly after COVID and what things are, what things people have had to do, large organizations and small, people are also starting to talk about climate change. And there was a time when nobody was looking at climate change as being a problem, but suddenly climate change is another subject that everybody is seriously looking at. Why do you think that is?
So I think one of the other big trends and shifts that we may see after this, when we come out of it, is the focus on sustainability. I think even though, COVID may not necessarily have been a direct outcome of climate change or, those kind of disasters, I do think as a result of this pause, people have realized that we humans have really not treated our planet and our fellow living beings and living things well. And, obviously the religious people think, oh, yeah, azab hai ye, God's sending us a message. The non-religious people think, oh, this is nature sending us a message, right? It's sort of coming back. So I think this pause has given people to step back and reflect that, are we good human beings? Are we good to our habitat? And I think that will lead us to make different decisions in the future. I see a lot of businesses re-looking at their business practices to go more sustainable at the core. I see new businesses that come up will definitely have sustainability as one of the premises. I do think there's broadly, and we've seen this over the last decade, a lot of startups that are coming out want to be businesses with a social conscience. I think now we will see much, much, much more of that. Listen, and simply, if you think of climate change directly, you guys are in Karachi, so you don't know, but in Lahore, the air breathes so well right now. Like if you've ever been to Lahore in November and December, you want to cry, you don't want to live in the city, you don't want your kids to be out there breathing. And suddenly, all of that has cleared up. So, 3 weeks of just locking us up in our houses, and the purity comes back. So that that makes me think that climate change has to become a much, much, much bigger topic than it has been.
Well, I'd like to add that we were all going through a certain flow in terms of routine, and so there is certainly this shock and awe treatment that has come in, which has forced us to go into a phase which we generally do not go into because we are all so caught up in our lives that you don't get the time to kind of think and reflect. So this has given us that opportunity to think and reflect, and going back to the basics again, you can't take things for granted any longer, which you used to take for granted. So with all that kind of thinking coming in, clearly environment would be more of a mainstay focus as we move forward as well. Well, yes, and I agree with Romana here, not just Lahore, even in Karachi, the quality of air has suddenly improved. And, when you go out in the evening, it's great to see not only the quality of air being improved, but, in many parts of the city, not all maybe, but, families, people doing cycling or whatever, not in large clusters individually, because it's a bit relaxed at that point in time. So it's a very different feel to the city that you've seen, which you never used to see before. We are very used to, all kind of pollution and, dust and all those kinds of things. And suddenly, people are walking on the streets. There is cycling happening as well, which are good trends. On a macro level as well, I think it's going to have an impact as far as environment is concerned. Now, as far as energy is concerned, which is the biggest culprit in terms of the kind of pollution that is being created, there is already talk of cleaner, greener energy sources that people would want to subscribe to. Now, one challenge that is going to come in, which is also a blessing, but will become a challenge, that with oil prices going down so significantly, if oil prices don't come back up, then those cleaner, greener sources will not be competitive. So let's wait and see how it all pans out. And hopefully if demand starts picking up, oil prices will start moving up again as well and normalize at some level. But as far as conscious thinking is concerned, consumers, people all across the world, not just in Pakistan, I completely agree that environment will be more of a focus moving forward, and sustainability will be more of an agenda, both for governments as well as for corporates moving forward.
Okay, so Saqib wants to know, so my question would be, should we expect banks and corporates to use less paper, work from home, and and fully digitize the way that they are working right now, instead of using the amount of paper that they use? I think all of us are guilty of that to some extent. Yeah. So Maheen, you want to take that? And Maheen, there's another question which I think is for you. It says, does that mean Pakistan appears on the map for a lot of businesses looking for remote workers? What can the digital workforce do to improve their visibility?
Okay,
For one of the, yeah.
first answer on the paperless, yes. I think just the learnings of the last 4 weeks are that we can do with a lot less paper usage. So I think it's not just financial institutions or banks, it's going to be everyone that should really think about that. I hope that trend continues. Unfortunately, I don't have as much faith in the human race being able to sustain good things for a very long time. I think we fall into bad habits pretty quickly. So I hope that that trend continues. It will have to, in my view, something that not just flows from the very top of organizations, but it has to flow in every employee's ethic as well. So, those are things which lead to these kind of changes. So, the hope is certainly, yes, we're looking at far less paperwork-focused society as a whole. So, that would be a big plus, though, in terms of efficiency for sure, and as well as terms of saving the environment. In terms of BPO, simple answer again is yes. I think what the rest of the world has kind of woken up to, particularly in the US and in Europe and the UK, and some of these very large economies, is there was perhaps already a big chunk that had moved into BPO, and a huge element of that was also being managed out of India. So India was a big market for these kind of outsourced and people outsourcing activities and call centers, etc. I think what companies internationally have realized is that you can't just rely on any one country, and the supply chain and continuity of that service is very important. So this is an opportunity for us to look at our workforce, see where we need to educate and train them. There are very few companies in Pakistan that are offering BPO services on a big scale. I mean, I think you can, think of maybe 3 or 4 maximum, but there need to be much more in this space, and looking at how we can train workers to do this, because one key thing is that no one globally and even locally wants to be dependent on any one supplier anymore. So that means that the business gets spread around to a lot of other countries. And that is something we need to work at to pick up. I agree with Romana that we're going to have to, right now our IT, sense was so basic, and now, coming up to a certain level, getting to that level for us, if we want to tap the BPO market, is going to be what makes it or breaks it. So, it's ours to lose. Fundamentally, yeah, it's ours to lose, and if we are not able to ramp up, then that demand will quickly just shift to someone else.
No, I think what he was asking was, this is Sadi Makhtoom. He's saying that as our business is going to look for more remote workers, individuals, and so if you are part of that digital workforce that is working remotely, how do you make yourself more visible so that corporations look at you rather than anyone else?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. I think, look, this is where employee habits have to change. I think previously employees are used to walking into the boss's room and having a conversation with him. I mean, you can't walk into his house anymore. He may not be there in the office as often. So communication is going to step up a lot. And communication in terms of whether it's email or whether it's WhatsApp or whether it's any kind of communication that works within an organization, you have to kind of raise your hand and say, I'm here and this is what I want to do, because otherwise it's very easy for you not to be noticed. So for all remote workers, even those that are supervising teams or those that are further up the hierarchy, I mean, I can just talk about myself, is that it has I have had to structure specific times of days that I'm talking to different teams in a very structured way, set senior team meetings on a certain day, so that that whole concept of open door policy, that doesn't really work in a remote environment. So you have to be more structured with your time, and you certainly have to get noticed by your superiors as well in terms of the work you're doing. And a lot of that onus is going to fall on the employees themselves and their bosses, who will then have to manage this much better. So communication, I think, is critical right now.
Okay, so I think we've lost Eqan. He might log in again. But there's a question from Zain Jafar. He says, do you believe that enough time has passed for people to implement these learnings, or will they be taken as a one-off occurrence and then go back to the previous norm?
I think it depends. There will be certain things that are here to stay and certain which are not. So they say that to form a habit can take something either like, when we talk about prayers and namaz, hum kehte hain 40 namazein pad lo, to, aadat ho jayegi. So, it can take as less as 40 iterations of something for it to become a habit, and can take as long as 200-300. There's data on this. I think that certain things will be here to stay. So, for example, online shopping. I think, you do it once and you're hooked. 10 times and you've sort of converted completely. There may be others which don't, and I think it's going to be a function of time, how long this lockdown or this COVID sort of social distancing environment stays. Time will tell. The ones which are the easiest and, sort of have a hook, they definitely will stay. I think, I do think most offices, once things go back to normal, will go to full-time work. And sure, they will use Zoom as a convenient tool, etc. But, only time will tell if we're going to be, if companies will come up with flexi-R HR policies, for example, right? That will, we don't know. The jury is out on it. So yeah, I think it's an evolving situation. We'll talk about it 6 months down the road or a year down the road. Too early.
Maheen, I don't know if you want to add to that, but there is another question which you might want to take. It's from Wahid Khatri. He says, what's your take on the idea of a national digital currency or cryptocurrency, considering the current digital boom?
So Maheen is actually head of our digital operations and digital marketing. So I'm glad he's asking this question. On cryptocurrencies, look, baby steps. I think let's get to a certain degree of IT literacy first. Let's get everyone used to the new normal or whatever the normal will look like. I think cryptocurrencies will have a role. I think blockchain will have a role in financial institutions, but we are still some way away from that. Right now, we are still very much focused on, when I talk about financial institutions, and then the part that is really picking up is the payments platform part. So how do we route payments from one institution to another institution or then to a vendor? I think that will explode. It already has, been on a very sharp exponential upswing in the last 2 years, but I think that is set to grow quite fast. I think, the cryptocurrency model or the blockchain model, etc., all these things, I think they are still a couple of years down the line. I'm not sure, it's not a question of institutions being ready. I'm not sure clients are ready. So there's a learning process that I think
or the state bank for that matter.
Or the state bank, for that matter, because I think they've outlawed cryptocurrencies right now. I think it's not something that will be completely off the agenda, but just not at this stage. I think they'll start talking about it, a year or two down the road. But right now, it's all about payments. It's all about interoperability. It's all about connectivity. It's all about just those basic, until you have that basic plumbing at the back in terms of your digital infrastructure. And the state bank's working quite heavily towards that, then you begin to get to the higher level concepts of cryptocurrency and even AI, etc., that Romana was referring to.
All right, Eqan's back. Hi, Eqan. So I'd like each of you to make one final statement on anything regarding this new norm of business before we wind up. We've taken a lot of your time, but I'd like to see if we've left anything out that you would like to include in this discourse. Or even if you want to ask each other.
So I'd just like to say that, yes, these are challenging times, but this too will pass. Our country has tremendous potential. The kind of demographic we have and the kind of fundamentals that we have in terms of the demand side being there, this is going to take us through, inshallah, through this period. While the short term looks challenging, the long term and the medium term, we are going to see a big uptick happening as far as demand is concerned as the economy goes back on track. Hopefully, we're able to keep control on the measures that have been put in place. the epidemic is under control. We are going to go back to work, yes, but a new normal will emerge, and work from home will be more and more an entangled part of that new normal. For the youth who are listening to this, I would like to say all of this does present opportunities for you as well, whether it's the digital side. Think creatively, think innovatively, think solutions. You know, we're facing lots of challenges. Think what can be done to bring some solution to some consumer. And if you can do that, there is an opportunity which you can untap, which can result into a new business.
Thank you. Maheen, would you like to make your final
Sure.
statement?
I mean, I've always felt that, you know, it is people that are going to drive change and sustain change. While we are liking some elements of this new environment, we're disliking elements, you know, of it as well. Ultimately, its sustainability will be on how our workforces can adapt longer term to this, how comfortable they will be in dealing with, you know, technology on a regular basis, and how quickly they will adopt that same technology to further their company. So the, you know, the ethos or the mindset shift will have to change. You know, we do have a habit as a people of thinking that if we're at home, you know, we don't have to spend as much time looking at work things, or we don't have to, you know, we do get a little lazy, frankly. So on that side, I think us as people, as individuals, you know, we have to take this seriously if we want to benefit from it, and understand that it is going to take a mindset shift to understand that sitting at home doesn't mean you're on a chutti, and coming to office doesn't necessarily mean that you will meet everybody in the office at all times. So I think the, you know, the shift for us will have to be internal. It'll have to be our mindsets, and then from there you will see a lot more sustainable, I think, change coming through.
Thank you. Romana?
So what I think this pandemic has shown us is that you have to have the ability to change fast or you suffer. I think we as individuals as well as businesses need to move fast, pivot fast, and really start thinking outside the box. And I think traditionally, especially in traditional businesses, you haven't seen historically much of that, at least in Pakistan. So I want to give an example of this company called Panera Breads, I think. It's a cafe in the West, in the US. They sell breads, sandwiches, and coffees, et cetera, et cetera. And when this hit, right, and stores were, like the shops were shut down, they said, oh, what do we do now? Because we need revenue, right? And that's the question all of us are asking right now. How do we get our revenue back? And they said, well, you know, we get a lot of raw produce, right? Sabzi and milk and whatever for our own business. Why don't we extend into that and let's open an online grocery store? In 10 days, they opened Panera Grocery. And sure, it's really tiny right now and it's, you know, blah, blah, blah. But they moved fast to see whatever they could do to fight and get revenue. And, you know, revenue, obviously for a company, but for obviously an employee, that means salary. That's your revenue, right? You know, that's what it's at. It's about survival of the fittest. It's survival of the fastest. It's the survival of the most creative. And that's what we all need to get to. It's very simple in my mind.
Sorry, I forgot my mic was off. Thanks very much. That was such an interesting discussion. And I'm sure we've had people on Facebook as well as Zoom listening to this talk. We will also share it so that those who were unable to join us can also benefit from it. Businesses, individuals, all of us are, as all of you said, are having to relook at their business models, relook at how they do things, how to move fast. I think it's given us some breathing space to really evaluate what we are doing, what's more important, and how we can survive not just this pandemic, but anything that hits us in the future. Thank you very much, Maheen, Romana, and Eqan, for joining me. It's been a pleasure, and I hope we can do it again sometime.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Wonderful.
Bye.